Good evening, everyone. Hello, and welcome to Chilliteracy. Happy Wednesday. I return after a cold that lasted far too long and is still, sticking around in my sinuses. And I'm very annoyed at the fact that it's doing that. So apologies if... Hi, Dave. What did you just call me? How dare you? Also, who are we reading? Yeah, nice. Yes, this cold has it's been a long one and it's stuck around, and yeah, my singing voice still hasn't 100% come back. So let's hope that my reading voice has. It feels like it has. Automod would let that through because Trollope, as the word, not the author, doesn't have an E in it. But yes, hello everybody. I hope we are all doing well. It's nice to be back. I apologise for not being around for 2 weeks, but as I say, cold was colding. And 2 Wednesdays ago, my speaking voice was sort of like this. Wasn't great, really. But yes, thank you very much, Smallcog and Parola, for the resubs. Mercy buckets, very kind of you. Oh yeah, Automod just lets that as well. That's cool. I suppose it's old enough an insult that Automod doesn't recognise it, maybe. But yes, I hope we're all doing well. Apologies for the oh. Well, I'm going to allow that, I guess. Oh, Sam got there before me. You knave, you cad, you cur. Wow. But yes, hello everybody. How are we all doing? I started reading that article Sam linked, and am sad because, in my opinion, and I realise I am a very literate person, but in my opinion, the opening of Bleak House is one of the best openings in all literature. I absolutely love it. It's so atmospheric. But yeah, I mean, yeah, again, it's not necessarily going to be the actual, like, the kids themselves. I mean, I suppose they're not kids if they're studying at university level, but it's going to be, what they have been taught. It's the education system failing us, really. But also I do wonder, like, whether, the fact that we don't actually... young people don't actually read, like, long bits of text, really. Everything is sort of short form stuff, I guess. You prefer The Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the blurst of times. Yeah. Oh no, that goes on a bit too long in my opinion. It's the best of times and the worst of times. It was a season of whatever the word is. Can't remember. It was a season of despair. It was this, it was that. It was like, okay, Dickens, we get it. You don't need to go on for a whole paragraph making comparisons here. Yep, we get the point. You're very proud of yourself. Okay, you can stop now. And it's, sorry, blurst of times. My apologies, Amras, of course. Ask you about how No Child Left Behind left every child behind. Don't actually, unless you want an hour-and-a-half lecture. You can put that lecture in the Discord if you want, Amras. Amras? Andy. It's a Simpsons reference. She won't get it. No, she won't. She didn't watch The Simpsons, very sadly. Sorry, I'm slurping tea. I apologise. But yes, I hope everybody's well. We are back on the old towers of Barchester today. Oh, excuse me. And the yawning has begun. What tea is reading brought to us by? Boring old. Bog standard English breakfast tea. Strong, not too much milk in it. In a mug that has been dropped at least 3 times, but only has 1 chip in it, so it's not bad. Cue subsequent rant about the youths not knowing Simpsons references and the decline of popular culture. I wasn't allowed to watch Simpsons. I didn't watch cartoons when I was a child. I practiced the trumpet instead. Let's not go into how much of a, you know. Wow, brain has stopped braining. Nope, word's gone. Deprived, there we go. Got there eventually. Deprived youth I had. No, it's just the fact that I was, you know, working very hard. Trumpet, oh god, are we making more references? Great. You dropped a small bowl from your grandmother today. Broke quite a lot. Oh no. Oh, that's sad. It's always really sad when something breaks from, you know, people who are no longer with you, or even people who still are, but, you know, gave you a gift because it was special. It's all you got, Amras. You are a walking load of references. That is all you are. You're just like 20,000 references in a trench coat, right? Instead of musical talent, you got a brain full of references you can jam into conversations to ruin them. I wouldn't say you'd ruin them. Just, you know, derail them slightly. I have references, just most of them are references that pretty much only I will get, because there'll be some form of musical reference. Although, having said that, that's not true. It is indeed all about knowing your skills and praying to them. Yes, pray to your skills. Playing to them. There we go. I'll get there. Oh boy. Yes, we have more Barchester Towers today, and can we remember what happened last time? It fell from the thing you put dishes to dry. Dish rack, I guess? It fell from that somehow. Oh, that sucks. Yeah, so we've got more drama in Barchester Towers. The Stanhopes, who have come back from various tropical climes. I say tropical climes. I think they've just been in Italy. They have returned, and Bertie, who I just can't hear the name Bertie without thinking of Jeeves and Worcester / Woodhouse, is making passes at Mr. Harding's daughter, who has also drawn the attention of Mr. Slope, who we do not want anywhere near her. And frankly, we don't really want Bertie anywhere near her either, because he doesn't seem like a very decent guy. Can't really, you know, he seems to be good at very different things, and then just like throws in the towel as soon as he gets good at something. Do we think he has ADHD? But yeah, that's pretty much where we're at. It's still up in the air as to whether Mr. Harding will accept the hospital position or not. And Dr. Grantley now doesn't want him to. It's basically reverse psychology, a lot of this. And not necessarily intentionally, like Mr. Slope going, oh, you should accept this, and then Mr. Harding going, oh, no, I'm not going to, because I don't want to if it's from you, and then suddenly it's like, no, you must. It's all very confusing. So yeah, that's where we're at. I hope that was a perfect summary that made complete sense, because I can explain things. You're very lost by all of this. You still have listened to a lot of the previous VODs. Oh well, you'll be scuppered then, Arian. But don't worry about it. Just I guess just listen along and enjoy. It is a lot of, like, I was going to say church politics. It's not even that. It's just, you know, manipulation and social politics, basically. The words just go into your head. Yeah, you've heard it all and you're still lost. I mean, frankly, me too. It's people being dramatic. Yeah, drama. You'll just hear from the drama. It is very much a soap opera. It is that kind of vibe. Also, my proud moment for today. This is completely not to do with anything, but I was doing some work and had just a bunch of like clips from an American like TV series to do with a hospital on in the background, just because I clicked on one because it was interesting, and then, you know, these things happen and then you're down the rabbit hole of it, and I stopped at one point and I'm just like, okay, this character, this actor is a singer. I can just tell. And guess what? I googled him and I was right. Get me? Turns out, I have done this several times now. You can tell when someone is a trained singer when they're speaking, especially if they're male and have, you know, well, actually no, they don't even need a specific voice, but it's just like, I know what voice type you are, and I know that you sing. And then I was like looking at it, I was like, oh, you're on Broadway. Ah, called it. Very, very smug about that. Yeah. Just random bit of me trivia for today. I can pretty reliably tell with higher voice types as well. It's always easier with guys though. Don't know why. Yeah. I feel like, yeah, it's got something to do with how you learn to speak. It was not Justin Timberlake. It was definitely not Justin Timberlake. Yeah. Smug about that. Anyway, if we're all sitting comfortably. Okay. Well, it was not that person, Sam, because you couldn't spell his name. Oh, you corrected it, damn. I'm going to take the last couple of sips of my tea, and then we shall carry on with Barchester Towers. Which I believe I am on the right part. I think part 7 we're on. I was trying to work that out earlier. If we're not, oh well. But yes, apologies if I either, you know, have to clear my throat or voice goes halfway through this. We shall see how it goes. Might be a shorter stream, so apologies if it is, but my voice is apparently still recovering because it's a bit of a prima donna. Right. We shall begin with Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope. Chapter 20. Mr. Arabin. The Reverend Francis Arabin, Fellow of Lazarus, late Professor of Poetry at Oxford, and present Vicar of St. Ewald in the Diocese of Barchester, must now be introduced personally to the reader. And as he will fill a conspicuous place in the volume, it is desirable that he should be made to stand before the reader's eye by the aid of such portraiture as the author is able to produce. It is to be regretted that no mental method of daguerreotype or photography has yet been discovered, by which the characters of men can be reduced to writing and put into grammatical language with an unerring precision of truthful description. How often does the novelist feel, aye, and the historian also, and the biographer, that he has conceived within his mind and accurately depicted on the tablet of his brain the full character and personage of a man, and that, nevertheless, when he flies to pen and ink to perpetuate the portrait, his words forsake, elude, disappoint, and play the deuce with him, till at the end of a dozen pages the man described has no more resemblance to the man conceived than the signboard at the corner of the street has to the Duke of Cambridge. And yet such mechanical descriptive skill would hardly give more satisfaction to the reader than the skill of the photographer does to the anxious mother desirous to possess an absolute duplicate of her beloved child. The likeness is indeed true, but it is a dull, dead, unfeeling, inauspicious likeness. The face is indeed there, and those looking at it will know at once whose image it is, but the owner of the face will not be proud of the resemblance. There is no royal road to learning, no shortcut to the acquirement of any valuable art. Let photographers and daguerreotypers do what they will, and improve as they may with further skill on that which skill has already done, they will never achieve a portrait of the human face divine. Let biographers, novelists, and the rest of us groan as we may under the burdens which we so often feel too heavy for our shoulders. We must either bear them up like men, or own ourselves too weak for the work we have undertaken. There is no way of writing well and also of writing easily. Labor omnia vincit improbus. Such should be the chosen motto of every labourer, and it may be that labour, if adequately enduring, may suffice at last to produce even some not untrue resemblance of the Reverend Francis Arabin. Of his doings in the world, and of the sort of fame which he has achieved, enough has already been said. It has also been said that he is 40 years of age and still unmarried. He was the younger son of a country gentleman of small fortune in the north of England. At an early age he went to Winchester, and was intended by his father for New College, but though studious as a boy, he was not studious within the prescribed limits, and at the age of 18 he left school with a character for talent, but without a scholarship. All that he had obtained, over and above the advantage of his character, was a gold medal for English verse, and hence was derived a strong presumption on the part of his friends that he was destined to add another name to the imperishable list of English poets. From Winchester he went to Oxford, and was entered as a commoner at Balliol. Here his special career very soon commenced. He utterly eschewed the society of fast men, gave no wine parties, kept no horses, rowed no boats, joined no rows, and was the pride of his college tutor. Such at least was his career till he had taken his little go, and then he commenced a course of action which, though not less creditable to himself as a man, was hardly so much to the taste of the tutor. He became a member of a vigorous debating society, and rendered himself remarkable there for humorous energy. Though always in earnest, yet his earnestness was always droll. To be true in his ideas, unanswerable in his syllogisms, and just in his aspirations was not enough for him. He had failed in his own opinion as well as that of others when others came to know him, if he could not reduce the arguments of his opponents to an absurdity and conquer both by wit and reason. To say that his object was ever to raise a laugh would be most untrue. He hated such common and unnecessary evidence of satisfaction on the part of his hearers. A joke that required to be laughed at was, with him, not worth uttering. He could appreciate by a keener sense than that of his ears the success of his wit, and would see in the eyes of his auditory whether or no he was understood and appreciated. He had been a religious lad before he left school. That is, he had addicted himself to a party in religion, and having done so had received that benefit which most men do who become partisans in such a cause. We are much too apt to look at schism in our church as an unmitigated evil. Moderate schism, if there may be such a thing, at any rate calls attention to the subject, draws in supporters who would otherwise have been inattentive to the matter, and teaches men to think upon religion. How great an amount of good of this description has followed that movement in the Church of England which commenced with the publication of Froude's Remains. As a boy, young Arabin took up the cudgels on the side of the Tractarians, and at Oxford he sat for a while at the feet of the great Newman. To this cause he lent all his faculties. For it he concocted verses, for it he made speeches, for it he scintillated the brightest sparks of his quiet wit. For it he ate and drank and dressed, and had his being. In due process of time he took his degree, and wrote himself B.A., but he did not do so with any remarkable amount of academical éclat. He had occupied himself too much with high church matters, and the polemics, politics, and outward demonstrations usually concurrent with high churchmanship to devote himself with sufficient vigour to the acquisition of a double first. He was not a double first, nor even a first-class man, But he revenged himself on the university by putting firsts and double firsts out of fashion for the year, and laughing down a species of pedantry which, at the age of 23, leaves no room in a man's mind for graver subjects than conic sections or Greek accents. Greek accents, however, and conic sections were esteemed necessaries at Balliol, and there was no admittance there for Mr. Arabin within the list of its fellows. Lazarus, however, the richest and most comfortable abode of Oxford dons, opened its bosom to the young champion of a church militant. Mr. Arabin was ordained, and became a fellow soon after taking his degree, and shortly after that was chosen Professor of Poetry. And now came the moment of his great danger. After many mental struggles and an agony of doubt which may be well surmised, the great prophet of the Tractarians confessed himself a Roman Catholic. Mr. Newman left the Church of England, and with him carried many a waverer. He did not carry off Mr. Arabin, but the escape which that gentleman had was a very narrow one. He left Oxford for a while that he might meditate in complete peace on the step which appeared to him to be all but unavoidable, and shut himself up in a little village on the seashore of one of our remotest counties, that he might learn by communing with his own soul whether or no he could with a safe conscience remain within the pale of his mother church. Things would have gone badly with him there had he been left entirely to himself. Everything was against him. All his worldly interests required him to remain a Protestant, and he looked on his worldly interests as a legion of foes, to get the better of whom was a point of extremest honour. In his then state of ecstatic agony, such a conquest would have cost him little. He could easily have thrown away all his livelihood, but it cost him much to get over the idea that by choosing the Church of England he should be open in his own mind to the charge that he had been led to such a choice by unworthy motives. Then his heart was against him. He loved with a strong and eager love the man who had hitherto been his guide, and yearned to follow his footsteps. His tastes were against him. The ceremonies and pomps of the Church of Rome, their august feasts and solemn fasts, invited his imagination and pleased his eye. His flesh was against him. How great an aid would it be to a poor, weak, wavering man to be constrained to high moral duties, self-denial, obedience, and chastity by laws which were certain in their enactments, and not to be broken without loud, palpable, unmistakable sin. Then his faith was against him. He required to believe so much, panted so eagerly to give signs of his belief, deemed it so insufficient to wash himself simply in the waters of Jordan, that some great deed, such as that of forsaking everything for a true church, had for him allurements almost past withstanding. Mr. Arabin was at this time a very young man, and when he left Oxford for his far retreat was much too confident in his powers of fence, and too apt to look down on the ordinary sense of ordinary people, to expect aid in the battle that he had to fight from any chance inhabitants of the spot which he had selected. But Providence was good to him, and there, in that all but desolate place, on the storm-beat shore of that distant sea, he met one who gradually calmed his mind, quieted his imagination, and taught him something of a Christian's duty. When Mr. Arabin left Oxford, he was inclined to look upon the rural clergymen of most English parishes almost with contempt. It was his ambition, should he remain within the fold of their church, to do somewhat towards redeeming and rectifying their inferiority, and to assist in infusing energy and faith into the hearts of Christian ministers, who were, as he thought, too often satisfied to go through life without much show of either. And yet it was from such a one that Mr. Arabin, in his extremest need, received that aid which he so much required. It was from the poor curate of a small Cornish parish that he first learnt to know that the highest laws for the governance of a Christian's duty must act from within and not from without, that no man can become a serviceable servant solely by obedience to written edicts, and that the safety which he was about to seek within the gates of Rome was no other than the selfish freedom from personal danger which the bad soldier attempts to gain who counterfeits illness on the eve of battle. Mr. Arabin returned to Oxford a humbler but a better and a happier man, and from that time forth he put his shoulder to the wheel as a clergyman of the church for which he had been educated. The intercourse of those among whom he familiarly lived kept him staunch to the principles of that system of the church to which he had always belonged. Since his severance from Mr. Newman, no one had so strong an influence over him as the head of his college. During the time of his expected apostasy, Dr. Gwynne had not felt much predisposition in favour of the young fellow. Though a high churchman himself within moderate limits, Dr. Gwynne felt no sympathy with men who could not satisfy their faiths with the 39 Articles. He regarded the enthusiasm of such as Newman as a state of mind more nearly allied to madness than to religion, and when he saw it evinced by very young men, was inclined to attribute a good deal of it to vanity. Dr. Gwynne himself, though a religious man, was also a thoroughly practical man of the world, and he regarded with no favourable eye the tenets of anyone who looked on the two things as incompatible. When he found that Mr. Arabin was a half-Roman, he began to regret all he had done towards bestowing a fellowship on so unworthy a recipient. And when again he learned that Mr. Arabin would probably complete his journey to Rome, he regarded with some satisfaction the fact that, in such case, the fellowship would be again vacant. When, however, Mr. Arabin returned and professed himself a confirmed Protestant, the master of Lazarus again opened his arms to him, and gradually he became the pet of the college. For some little time he was saturnine, silent, and unwilling to take any prominent part in university broils, but gradually his mind recovered, or rather made, its tone, and he became known as a man always ready at a moment's notice to take up the cudgels in opposition to anything that savoured of an evangelic bearing. He was great in sermons, great on platforms, great at after-dinner conversations, and always pleasant as well as great. He took delight in elections, served on committees, opposed tooth and nail all projects of university reform, and talked jovially over his glass of port of the ruin to be anticipated by the Church, and of the sacrilege daily committed by the Whigs. The ordeal through which he had gone in resisting the blandishments of the Lady of Rome had certainly done much towards the strengthening of his character. Although in small and outward matters he was self-confident enough, nevertheless in things affecting the inner man he aimed at a humility of spirit which would never have been attractive to him but for that visit to the coast of Cornwall. This visit he now repeated every year. Such is an interior view of Mr. Arabin at the time when he accepted the living of St. Awold. Exteriorly, he was not a remarkable person. He was above the middle height, well-made and very active. His hair, which had been jet black, was now tinged with grey, but his face bore no sign of years. It would perhaps be wrong to say that he was handsome, but his face was, nevertheless, pleasant to look upon. The cheekbones were rather too high for beauty, and the formation of the forehead too massive and heavy, but the eyes, nose, and mouth were perfect. There was a continual play of lambent fire about his eyes, which gave promise of either pathos or humour whenever he essayed to speak, and that promise was rarely broken. There was a gentle play about his mouth which declared that his wit never descended to sarcasm, and that there was no ill nature in his repartee. Mr. Arabin was a popular man among women, but more so as a general than a special favourite. Living as a fellow at Oxford, marriage with him had been out of the question, and it may be doubted whether he had ever allowed his heart to be touched. Though belonging to a church in which celibacy is not the required lot of its ministers, he had come to regard himself as one of those clergymen to whom to be a bachelor is almost a necessity. He had never looked for parochial duty, and his career at Oxford was utterly incompatible with such domestic joys as a wife and nursery. He looked on women, therefore, in the same light that one sees them regarded by many Romish priests. He liked to have near him that which was pretty and amusing, but women generally were little more to him than children. He talked to them without putting out all his powers, and listened to them without any idea that what he should hear from them could either actuate his conduct or influence his opinion. Such was Mr. Arabin, the new vicar of St. Awold, who is going to stay with the Grantleys at Plumstead Episcopi. Mr. Arabin reached Plumstead the day before Mr. Harding and Eleanor and the Grantley family were thus enabled to make his acquaintance and discuss his qualifications before the arrival of the other guests. Griselda was surprised to find that he looked so young, but she told Florinda, her younger sister, when they had retired for the night, that he did not talk at all like a young man, and she decided, with the authority that 17 has over 16, that he was not at all nice, although his eyes were lovely. As usual, 16 implicitly acceded to the dictum of 17 in such a manner, and said that he certainly was not nice. They then branched off on the relative merits of other clerical bachelors in the vicinity, and both determined, without any feeling of jealousy between them, that a certain Reverend Augustus Green was by many degrees the most estimable of the lot. The gentleman in question had certainly much in his favour, as, having a comfortable allowance from his father, he could devote the whole proceeds of his curacy to violet gloves and unexceptionable neckties. Having thus fixedly resolved that the newcomer had nothing about him to shake the preeminence of the exalted Green, the two girls went to sleep in each other's arms, contented with themselves and the world. Mrs. Grantley, at first sight, came to much the same conclusion about her husband's favourite as her daughters had done, though, in seeking to measure his relative value, she did not compare him to Mr. Green. Indeed, she made no comparison by name between him and anyone else, but she remarked to her husband that one person's swans were very often another person's geese, thereby clearly showing that Mr. Arabin had not yet proved his qualifications in swanhood to her satisfaction. "Well, Susan," said he, rather offended at hearing his friend spoken of so disrespectfully, "if you take Mr. Arabin for a goose, I cannot say that I think very highly of your discrimination." "A goose? No, of course he's not a goose. I've no doubt he's a very clever man. But you're so matter-of-fact, Archdeacon, when it suits your purpose, that one can't trust oneself to any façon de parler. I've no doubt Mr. Arabin is a very valuable man, at Oxford, and that he'll be a good vicar at St. Awold. All I mean is that having passed one evening with him, I don't find him to be absolutely a paragon. In the first place, if I am not mistaken, he is a little inclined to be conceited." "Of all the men that I know intimately," said the Archdeacon, "Arabin is, in my opinion, the most free from any taint of self-conceit. His fault is that he's too diffident." "Perhaps so," said the lady, "only I must own I did not find it out this evening." Nothing further was said about him. Dr. Grantley thought that his wife was abusing Mr. Arabin merely because he had praised him, and Mrs. Grantley knew that it was useless arguing for or against any person in favour of or in opposition to whom the Archdeacon had already pronounced a strong opinion. In truth, they were both right. Mr. Arabin was a diffident man in social intercourse with those whom he did not intimately know. When placed in situations which it was his business to fill, and discussing matters with which it was his duty to be conversant, Mr. Arabin was from habit brazen-faced enough. When standing on a platform in Exeter Hall, no man would be less amazed than he by the eyes of the crowd before him, for such was the work which his profession had called on him to perform. But he shrank from a strong expression of opinion in general society, and his doing so not uncommonly made it appear that he considered the company not worth the trouble of his energy. He was averse to dictate when the place did not seem to him to justify dictation, and as those subjects on which people wished to hear him speak were such as he was accustomed to treat with decision, he generally shunned the traps there were laid to allure him into discussion, and by doing so not unfrequently subjected himself to such charges as those brought against him by Mrs. Grantley. Mr. Arabin, as he sat at his open window, enjoying the delicious moonlight and gazing at the grey towers of the church, which stood almost within the rectory grounds, little dreamed that he was the subject of so many friendly or unfriendly criticisms. Considering how much we are all given to discuss the characters of others, and discuss them often not in the strictest spirit of charity, it is singular how little we are inclined to think that others can speak ill-naturedly of us, and how angry and hurt we are when proof reaches us that they have done so. It is hardly too much to say that we all of us occasionally speak of our dearest friends in a manner in which those dearest friends would very little like to hear themselves mentioned, and that we nevertheless expect that our dearest friends shall invariably speak of us as though they were blind to all our faults, but keenly alive to every shade of our virtues. It did not occur to Mr. Arabin that he was spoken of at all. It seemed to him, when he compared himself with his host, that he was a person of so little consequence to any, that he was worth no one's words or thoughts. He was utterly alone in the world as regarded domestic ties and those inner familiar relations which are hardly possible between others than husbands and wives, parents and children, or brothers and sisters. He had often discussed with himself the necessity of such bonds for a man's happiness in this world, and had generally satisfied himself with the answer that happiness in this world is not a necessity. Herein he deceived himself, or rather tried to do so. He, like others, yearned for the enjoyment of whatever he saw enjoyable, and though he attempted, within the modern stoicism of so many Christians, to make himself believe that joy and sorrow were matters which here should be held as perfectly indifferent, these things were not indifferent to him. He was tired of his Oxford rooms and his college life. He regarded the wife and children of his friend with something like envy. He all but coveted the pleasant drawing-room, with its pretty windows opening on to lawns and flower-beds, the apparel of the comfortable house, and, above all, the air of home which encompassed it all. It will be said that no time can have been so fitted for such desires on his part as this, when he had just possessed himself of a country parish, of a living among fields and gardens, of a house which a wife would grace. It is true there was a difference between the opulence of Plumstead and the modest economy of St. Awold, but surely Mr. Arabin was not a man to sigh after wealth. Of all men, his friends would have unanimously declared he was the last to do so. But how little our friends know us. In his period of stoical rejection of this world's happiness, he had cast from him as utter dross all anxiety as to fortune. He had, as it were, proclaimed himself to be indifferent to promotion, and those who chiefly admired his talents, and would mainly have exerted themselves to secure to them their deserved reward, had taken him at his word. And now, if the truth must out, he felt himself disappointed. Disappointed not by them, but by himself. The daydream of his youth was over, and at the age of 40 he felt that he was not fit to work in the spirit of an apostle. He had mistaken himself, and learned his mistake when it was past remedy. He had professed himself indifferent to mitres and diaconal residencies, to rich livings and pleasant glebes, and now he had to own to himself that he was sighing for the good things of other men, on whom in his pride he had ventured to look down. Not for wealth, in its vulgar sense, had he ever sighed, not for the enjoyment of rich things had he ever longed, but for the allotted share of worldly bliss, which a wife and children and happy home could give him, for that usual amount of comfort which he had ventured to reject as unnecessary for him, he did now feel that he would have been wiser to have searched. He knew that his talents, his position, and his friends would have won for him promotion had he put himself in the way of winning it. Instead of doing so, he had allowed himself to be persuaded to accept a living which would give him an income of some £300 a year, should he, by marrying, throw up his fellowship. Such, at the age of 40, was the worldly result of labour which the world had chosen to regard as successful. The world also thought that Mr. Arabin was, in his own estimation, sufficiently paid. Alas, alas, the world was mistaken, and Mr. Arabin was beginning to ascertain that such was the case. And here may I beg the reader not to be hard in his judgment upon this man. Is not the state at which he has arrived the natural result of efforts to reach that which is not the condition of humanity? Is not modern Stoicism, built though it be on Christianity, as great an outrage on human nature as was the Stoicism of the ancients? The philosophy of Zeno was built on true laws, but on true laws misunderstood, and therefore misapplied. It is the same with our Stoics here, who would teach us that wealth and worldly comfort and happiness on earth are not worth the search. Alas for a doctrine which can find no believing pupils and no true teachers. The case of Mr. Arabin was the more singular as he belonged to a branch of the Church of England well inclined to regard its temporalities with avowed favour, and had habitually lived with men who were accustomed to much worldly comfort. But such was his idiosyncrasy that these very facts had produced within him, in early life, a state of mind that was not natural to him. He was content to be a high churchman if he could be so on principles of his own, and could strike out a course showing a marked difference from those with whom he consorted. He was ready to be a partisan as long as he was allowed to have a course of action and of thought unlike that of his party. His party had indulged him, and he began to feel that his party was right and himself wrong, just when such a conviction was too late to be of service to him. He discovered, when such discovery was no longer serviceable, that it would have been worth his while to have worked for the usual pay assigned to work in this world, and have earned a wife and children, with a carriage for them to sit in, to have earned a pleasant dining room in which his friends could drink his wine, and the power of walking up the high street of his country town with the knowledge that all its tradesmen would have gladly welcomed him within their doors. Other men arrived at those convictions in their start in life, and so worked up to them. To him they had come when they were too late to be of use. It has been said that Mr. Arabin was a man of pleasantry, and it may be thought that such a state of mind as that described would be antagonistic to humour. But surely such is not the case. Wit is the outward mental casing of the man, and has no more to do with the inner mind of thoughts and feelings than have the rich brocaded garments of the priest at the altar with the asceticism of the anchorite below them, whose skin is tormented with sackcloth, and whose body is half flayed with rods. Nay, will not such a one often rejoice more than any other in the rich show of his outer apparel? Will it not be food for his pride to feel that he groans inwardly while he shines outwardly? So it is with the mental efforts which men make. Those which they show forth daily to the world are often the opposites of the inner workings of the spirit. In the Archdeacon's drawing-room, Mr. Arabin had sparkled with his usual unaffected brilliancy, but when he retired to his bedroom, he sat there, sad at his open window, repining within himself that he also had no wife, no bairns, no soft sward of lawn duly mown for him to lie on, no herd of attendant curates, no bowings from the banker's clerks, no rich rectory. That apostleship that he had thought of had evaded his grasp, and he was now only vicar of St. Ewald's with a taste for a mitre. Truly he had fallen between two stools. Chapter 21. St. Ewald's Parsonage. When Mr. Harding and Mrs. Bold reached the rectory on the following morning, the Archdeacon and his friend were at St. Ewald's. They had gone over that the new vicar might inspect his church and be introduced to the squire, and were not expected back before dinner. Mr. Harding rambled out by himself, and strolled, as was his wont at Plumstead, about the lawn and round the church, and as he did so the two sisters naturally fell into conversation about Barchester. There was not much sisterly confidence between them. Mrs. Grantley was 10 years older than Eleanor, and had been married while Eleanor was yet a child. They had never, therefore, poured into each other's ears their hopes and loves, and now that one was a wife and the other a widow, it was not probable that they would begin to do so. They lived too much asunder to be able to fall into that kind of intercourse which makes confidence between sisters almost a necessity, and moreover, that which is so easy at 18 is often very difficult at 28. Mrs. Grantley knew this, and did not, therefore, expect confidence from her sister, and yet she longed to ask her whether in real truth Mr. Slope was agreeable to her. It was by no means difficult to turn the conversation to Mr. Slope. That gentleman had become so famous at Barchester, had so much to do with all clergymen connected with the city, and was so specially concerned in the affairs of Mr. Harding, that it would have been odd if Mr. Harding's daughters had not talked about him. Mrs. Grantley was soon abusing him, which she did with her whole heart, and Mrs. Bold was nearly as eager to defend him. She positively disliked the man, would have been delighted to learn that he had taken himself off so that she should never see him again, had indeed almost a fear of him, and yet she constantly found herself taking his part. The abuse of other people, and abuse of a nature that she felt to be unjust, imposed this necessity on her, and at last made Mr. Slope's defence an habitual course of argument with her. From Mr. Slope the conversation turned to the Stanhopes, and Mrs. Grantley was listening with some interest to Eleanor's account of the family, when it dropped out that Mr. Slope made one of that party. "What?" said the lady of the rectory. "Was Mr. Slope there too?" Eleanor merely replied that such had been the case. "Why, Eleanor, he must be very fond of you, I think. He seems to follow you everywhere." Even this did not open Eleanor's eyes. She merely laughed and said that she imagined Mr. Slope found other attractions at Dr. Stanhope's. And so they parted. Mrs. Grantley felt quite convinced that the odious match would take place, and Mrs. Bold as convinced that that unfortunate chaplain, disagreeable as he must be allowed to be, was more sinned against than sinning. The Archdeacon, of course, heard before dinner that Eleanor had remained the day before in Barchester with the view of meeting Mr. Slope, and that she had so met him. He remembered how she had positively stated that there were to be no guests at the Stanhopes, and he did not hesitate to accuse her of deceit. Moreover, the fact, or rather presumed fact, of her being deceitful on such a matter spoke but too plainly in evidence against her as to her imputed crime of receiving Mr. Slope as a lover. "I am afraid that anything we can do will be too late," said the Archdeacon. "I own I am fairly surprised. I never liked your sister's taste with regard to men, but still I did not give her credit for... Ugh! And so soon, too," said Mrs. Grantley, who thought more perhaps of her sister's indecorum in having a lover before she had put off her weeds than her bad taste in having such a lover as Mr. Slope. "Well, my dear, I shall be sorry to be harsh, or to do anything that can hurt your father, but positively neither that man nor his wife shall come within my doors." Mrs. Grantley sighed, and then attempted to console herself and her lord by remarking that, after all, the thing was not accomplished yet. Now that Eleanor was at Plumstead, much might be done to wean her from her fatal passion. Poor Eleanor. The evening passed off without anything to make it remarkable. Mr. Arabin discussed the parish of St. Awold with the Archdeacon, and Mrs. Grantley and Mr. Harding, who knew the personages of the parish, joined in. Eleanor also knew them, but she said little. Mr. Arabin did not apparently take much notice of her, and she was not in a humour to receive at that time with any special grace any special favourite of her brother-in-law. Her first idea on reaching her bedroom was that a much pleasanter family party might be met at Dr. Stanhope's than at the rectory. She began to think that she was getting tired of clergymen and their respectable, humdrum, wearisome mode of living, and that, after all, people in the outer world, who had lived in Italy, London, or elsewhere, need not necessarily be regarded as atrocious and abominable. The Stanhopes, she had thought, were a giddy, thoughtless, extravagant set of people, but she had seen nothing wrong about them, and had, on the other hand, found that they thoroughly knew how to make their house agreeable. It was 1,000 pities, she thought, that the Archdeacon should not have a little of the same savoir-vivre. Mr. Arabin, as we have said, did not apparently take much notice of her, but yet he did not go to bed without feeling that he had been in company with a very pretty woman, and, as is the case with most bachelors, and some married men, regarded the prospects of his month's visit at Plumstead in a much pleasanter light when he learned that a very pretty woman was to share it with him. Before they all retired, it was settled that the whole party should drive over on the following day to inspect the parsonage at St. Awold. The 3 clergymen were to discuss dilapidations, and the 2 ladies were to lend their assistance in suggesting such changes as might be necessary for a bachelor's abode. Accordingly, soon after breakfast, the carriage was at the door. There was only room for 4 inside, and the Archdeacon got up upon the box. Eleanor found herself opposite to Mr. Arabin, and was, therefore, in a manner forced into conversation with him. They were soon on comfortable terms together, and had she thought about it, she would have thought that, in spite of his black cloth, Mr. Arabin would not have been a bad addition to the Stanhope family party. Now that the Archdeacon was away, they could all trifle. Mr. Harding began by telling them in the most innocent manner imaginable an old legend about Mr. Arabin's new parish. There was, he said, in days of yore, an illustrious priestess of St. Awold, famed through the whole country for curing all manner of diseases. She had a well, as all priestesses have ever had, which well was extant to this day, and shared in the minds of many of the people the sanctity which belonged to the consecrated ground of the parish church. Mr. Arabin declared that he should look on such tenets on the part of his parishioners as anything but orthodox. And Mrs. Grantley replied that she so entirely disagreed with him as to think that no parish was in a proper state that had not its priestess as well as its priest. "The duties are never well done," said she, "unless they are so divided." "I suppose, papa," said Eleanor, "that in the olden times the priestess bore all the sway herself. Mr. Arabin, perhaps, thinks that such might be too much the case now if a sacred lady were admitted within the parish." "I think, at any rate," said he, "that it is safer to run no such risk. No priestly pride has ever exceeded that of sacerdotal females. A very lowly curate I might, perhaps, essay to rule, but a curatess would be sure to get the better of me." "There are certainly examples of such accidents happening," said Mrs. Grantley. "They do say that there is a priestess at Barchester who is very imperious in all things touching the altar. Perhaps the fear of such a fate is before your eyes." When they were joined by the Archdeacon on the gravel before the vicarage, they descended again to a grave dullness. Not that Archdeacon Grantley was a dull man, but his frolic humours were of a cumbrous kind, and his wit, when he was witty, did not generally extend itself to his auditory. On the present occasion he was soon making speeches about wounded roofs and walls, which he declared to be in want of some surgeon's art. There was not a partition that he did not tap, nor a block of chimneys that he did not narrowly examine. All water pipes, flues, cisterns, and sewers underwent an investigation, and he even descended, in the care of his friend, so far as to bore sundry boards in the floors with a bradawll. Don't even know what that is. Mr. Arabin accompanied him through the rooms, trying to look wise in such domestic matters, and the other three also followed. Mrs. Grantley showed that she had not herself been priestess of a parish 20 years for nothing, and examined the bells and window-panes in a very knowing way. "You will at any rate have a beautiful prospect out of your own window if this is to be your private sanctum," said Eleanor. She was standing at the lattice of a little room upstairs, from which the view certainly was very lovely. It was from the back of the vicarage, and there was nothing to interrupt the eye between the house and the glorious grey pile of the cathedral. The intermediate ground, however, was beautifully studded with timber. In the immediate foreground ran the little river which afterwards skirted the city, and just to the right of the cathedral the pointed gables and chimneys of Hiram's Hospital peeped out of the elms which encompass it. "Yes," said he, joining her, "I shall have a beautifully complete view of my adversaries. I shall sit down before the hostile town and fire away at them at very pleasant distance. I shall just be able to lodge a shot in the hospital, should the enemy ever get possession of it, and as for the palace, I have it within full range." "I never saw anything like you clergymen," said Eleanor. "You are always thinking of fighting each other."
Either that, said he, or else supporting each other. The pity is that we cannot do the one without the other. But are we not here to fight? Is not ours a church militant? What is all our work but fighting, and hard fighting if it be well done? But not with each other. That's as it may be. The same complaint which you make of me for battling with another clergyman of our own church of our own church, someone would make against me for battling with the error of a priest of Rome. Yet surely you would not be inclined to say that I should be wrong to do battle with such as him. A pagan, too, with his multiplicity of gods, would think it equally odd that the Christian and the Roman should disagree. Ah, but you wage your wars about trifles so bitterly. Wars about trifles, said he, are always bitter, especially among neighbours. When the differences are great, and the parties comparative strangers, men quarrel with courtesy. What combatants are ever so eager as two brothers? But do not such contentions bring scandal on the church? More scandal would fall on the church if there were no such contentions. We have but one way to avoid them, that of acknowledging a common head of our church, whose word on all points of doctrine shall be authoritative. Such a termination of our difficulties is alluring enough. It has charms which are irresistible to many, and all but irresistible, I own, to me. You speak now of the Church of Rome? Said Eleanor. No, said he, not necessarily of the Church of Rome, but of a church with a head. Had it pleased God to vouchsafe to us such a church, our path would have been easy. But easy paths have not been thought good for us. He paused and stood silent for a while, thinking of the time when he had so nearly sacrificed all he had, his powers of mind, his free agency, the fresh running waters of his mind's fountain, his very inner self, for an easy path in which no fighting would be needed. And then he continued, What you say is partly true. Our contentions do bring on us some scandal. The outer world, though it constantly reviles us for our human infirmities, and throws in our teeth the fact that, being clergymen, we are still no more than men, demands of us that we should do our work with godlike perfection. There is nothing godlike about us. We differ from each other with the acerbity common to man. We triumph over each other with human frailty. We allow differences on subjects of divine origin to produce among us antipathies and enmities which are anything but divine. This is all true. But what would you have in place of it? There is no infallible head for a church on earth. This dream of believing man has been tried, and we see in Italy and in Spain what has come of it. Grant that there are, and have been, no bickerings within the pale of the Pope's church. Such an assumption would be utterly untrue, but let us grant it, and then let us say which church has incurred the heavier scandals. There was a quiet earnestness about Mr. Arabin, as he half acknowledged and half defended himself from the charge brought against him, which surprised Eleanor. She had been used all her life to listen to the disputants, to listen to clerical discussion, but the points at issue between the disputants had so seldom been of more than temporal significance as to have left on her mind no feeling of reverence for such subjects. There had always been a hard worldly leaven of the love either of income or of power in the strains she had heard. There had been no panting for the truth, no aspirations after religious purity. It had always been taken for granted by those around her that they were indubitably right, that there was no ground for doubt that the hard uphill work of ascertaining what the duty of a clergyman should be had been already accomplished in full, and that what remained for an active militant parson to do was to hold his own against all comers. Her father, it is true, was an exception to this. But then he was so essentially anti-militant in all things that she classed him in her own mind apart from all others. She had never argued the matter within herself, or considered whether this common tone was or was not faulty, but she was sick of it without knowing that she was so. And now she found, to her surprise, and not without a certain pleasurable excitement, that this newcomer among them spoke in a manner very different from that to which she was accustomed. "It is so easy to condemn," said he, continuing the thread of his thoughts. "I know no life that must be so delicious as that of a writer for newspapers, or a leading member of the opposition, to thunder forth accusations against men in power, show up the worst side of everything that is produced, to pick holes in every coat, to be indignant, sarcastic, jocose, moral or supercilious, to damn with faint praise, or crush with open calumny. What can be so easy as this when the critic has to be responsible for nothing? You condemn what I do, but put yourself in my position and do the reverse, and then see if I cannot condemn you." "Oh, Mr. Arabin, I do not condemn you." "Pardon me, you do, Mrs. Bold. You as one of the world, you are now the opposition member. You are now composing your leading article, and well and bitterly you do it. 'Let dogs delight to bark and bite.' You fitly begin with an elegant quotation. But if we are to have a church at all, in heaven's name let the pastors who preside over it keep their hands from each other's throats. Lawyers can live without befouling each other's names. Doctors do not fight duels. Why is it that clergymen alone should indulge themselves in such unrestrained liberty of abuse against each other? And so you go on reviling us for our ungodly quarrels, our sectarian propensities, and scandalous differences. It will, however, give you no trouble to write another article next week in which we, or some of us, shall be twitted with an unseemly apathy in matters of our vocation. It will not fall on you to reconcile the discrepancy. Your readers will never ask you how the poor parson is to be urgent in season and out of season, and yet never come in contact with men who think widely differently from him. You, when you condemn this foreign treaty or that official arrangement, will have to incur no blame for the graver faults of any different measure. It is so easy to condemn, and so pleasant too, for eulogy charms no listeners as detraction does." Eleanor only half followed him in his raillery, but she caught his meaning. "I know I ought to apologise for presuming to criticise you," she said, "but I was thinking with sorrow of the ill will that has lately come among us at Barchester, and I spoke more freely than I should have done." "Peace on earth and goodwill among men are, like heaven, promises for the future," said he, following rather his own thoughts than hers. "When that prophecy is accomplished, there will no longer be any need for clergymen." Here they were interrupted by the Archdeacon, whose voice was heard from the cellar shouting to the vicar, "Arabin! Arabin!" and then turning to his wife, who was apparently at his elbow, "Where has he gone to? This cellar is perfectly abominable. It would be murder to put a bottle of wine into it till it has been roofed, walled and floored. How on earth old Goodenough ever got on with it, I cannot guess. But then Goodenough never had a glass of wine that any man could drink." "What is it, Archdeacon?" said the vicar, running downstairs and leaving Eleanor above to her meditations. "This cellar must be roofed, walled and floored," repeated the Archdeacon. "Now mind what I say, and don't let the architect persuade you that it will do. Half these fellows know nothing about wine. This place as it is now would be damp and cold in winter, and hot and muggy in summer. I wouldn't give a straw for the best wine that ever was vinted after it had lain here a couple of years." Mr. Arabin assented, and promised that the cellar should be reconstructed according to the Archdeacon's receipt. And, Arabin, look here. Was such an attempt at a kitchen grate ever seen? The grate is really very bad, said Mrs. Grantley. I am sure the priestess won't approve of it when she is brought home to the scene of her future duties. Really, Mr. Arabin, no priestess accustomed to such an excellent well as that above could put up with such a grate as this. If there must be a priestess at St. Awolds at all, Mrs. Grantley, I think we will leave her to her well, and not call down her divine wrath on any of the imperfections rising from our human poverty. However, I own I am amenable to the attractions of a well-cooked dinner, and the grate shall certainly be changed. By this time the Archdeacon had again ascended, and was now in the dining-room. Arabin, said he, speaking in his usual loud, clear voice, and with that tone of dictation which was so common to him, you must positively alter this dining-room, that is, remodel it altogether. Look here, it is just 16 feet by 15. Did anybody ever hear of a dining-room of such proportions? And the Archdeacon stepped the room long ways and crossways, with ponderous steps, as though a certain amount of ecclesiastical dignity could be imparted even to such an occupation as that by the manner of doing it. Barely 16. You may call it a square. It would do very well for a round table, suggested the ex-warden. Now there was something peculiarly unorthodox in the Archdeacon's estimation in the idea of a round table. He had always been accustomed to a goodly board of decent length, comfortably elongating itself according to the number of the guests, nearly black with perpetual rubbing, and as bright as a mirror. Now round dinner tables are generally of oak, or else of such new construction as not to have acquired the peculiar hue which was so pleasing to him. He connected them with what he called the nasty, new-fangled method of leaving a cloth on the table, as though to warn people that they were not to sit long. In his eyes there was something democratic and parvenu in a round table. He imagined that dissenters and calico printers chiefly used them, and perhaps a few literary lions more conspicuous for their wit than their gentility. He was a little flurried at the idea of such an article being introduced into that diocese by a protégé of his own, and at the instigation of his father-in-law. A round dinner table, said he with some heat, is the most abominable article of furniture that ever was invented. I hope that Arabin has more taste than to allow such a thing in his house. Poor Mr. Harding felt himself completely snubbed, and of course said nothing further. But Mr. Arabin, who had yielded submissively in the small matters of the cellar and the kitchen grate, found himself obliged to oppose reforms which might be of a nature too expensive for his pocket. But it seems to me, Archdeacon, that I can't very well lengthen the room without pulling down this wall, and if I pull down the wall I must build it up again. Then if I throw out a bow on this side, I must do the same on the other. Then if I do it for the ground floor, I must carry it up to the floor above. That will be putting a new front to the house, and will cost, I suppose, a couple of £100. The ecclesiastical commissioners will hardly assist me when they hear that my grievance consists in having a dining-room only 16 feet long. The Archdeacon proceeded to explain that nothing would be easier than adding 6 feet to the front of the dining-room without touching any other room in the house. Such irregularities of construction in small country houses were, he said, rather graceful than otherwise, and he offered to pay for the whole thing out of his own pocket if it cost more than £40. Mr. Arabin, however, was firm, and although the Archdeacon fussed and fumed about it, he would not give way. £40, he said, was a matter of serious moment to him, and his friends, if under such circumstances they would be good-natured enough to come to him at all, must put up with the misery of a square room. He was willing to compromise matters by disclaiming any intention of having a round table. But, said Mrs. Grantley, what if the priestess insists on having both the rooms enlarged? The priestess, in that case, must do it for herself, Mrs. Grantley. I have no doubt she will be well able to do so, replied the lady, "to do that and many more wonderful things. I am quite sure that the priestess of St. Awold, when she does come, won't come empty-handed." Mr. Arabin, however, did not appear well inclined to enter into speculative expenses on such a chance as this, and therefore any material alterations in the house, the cost of which could not fairly be made to lie at the door either of the ecclesiastical commissioners or of the estate of the late incumbent, were tabooed. With this essential exception, the Archdeacon ordered, suggested, and carried all points before him in a manner very much to his own satisfaction. A close observer, had there been one there, might have seen that his wife had been quite as useful in the matter as himself. No one knew better than Mrs. Grantley the appurtenances necessary to a comfortable house. She did not, however, think it necessary to lay claim to any of the glory which her lord and master was so ready to appropriate as his own. Having gone through their work effectually and systematically, the party returned to Plumstead well satisfied with their expedition. And there we shall take a break. Thank you for listening so far. I hope you're enjoying. I certainly am. Boop. Right. Go do break-related things, and we'll see you back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. Hello, everybody. We are back. Oh, I put the microphone in a bad place. Hang on. Whoop. Sorted. I hope we've all had a good break, done break-related things. I have drunk so much water. We shall see how we do. I might just do one more chapter. Just because, as you can probably hear, I'm still suffering a little. And just still got a lot of gunk in my throat, basically. I'm sure you all wanted to know that. But yeah, I hope you're enjoying so far. I like Mr. Arabin. He's kind of cool. Apart from the fact that apparently he has, like, just kind of generally shitty opinions on women. But, you know, I feel like a lot of the men in this do. Things of the time, she says, hopefully. Right. If we're all back, sitting comfortably, have some form of beverage or snack, then we shall continue with Chapter 22, The Thorns of Ullathorne. On the following Sunday, Mr. Arabin was to read himself in at his new church. It was agreed at the rectory that the archdeacon should go over with him and assist at the reading desk, and that Mr. Harding should take the archdeacon's duty at Plumstead Church. Mrs. Grantley had her school and her buns to attend to, and professed that she could not be spared, but Mrs. Bold was to accompany them. It was further agreed also that they would lunch at the squire's house, and return home after the afternoon's service. Wilfrid Thorne, Esquire of Ullathorne, was the squire of St. Ewolds, or rather the squire of Ullathorne, for the domain of the modern landlord was of wider notoriety than the fame of the ancient saint. He was a fair specimen of what that race has come to in our days, which a century ago was, as we are told, fairly represented by Squire Weston. If that representation be a true one, few classes of men can have made faster strides in improvement. Mr. Thorne, however, was a man possessed of quite a sufficient number of foibles to lay him open to much ridicule. He was still a bachelor, being about 50, and was not a little proud of his person. When living at home at Ullathorne there was not much room for such pride, and therefore he always looked like a gentleman, and like that which he certainly was, the first man in his parish. But during the month or 6 weeks which he annually spent in London, he tried so hard to look like a great man there also, which he certainly was not, that he was put down as a fool by many at his club. He was a man of considerable literary attainment in a certain way and on certain subjects. His favourite authors were Montaigne and Burton, and he knew more perhaps than any other man in his own county, and the next to it, of the English essayists of the last 2 centuries. He possessed complete sets of the Idler, the Spectator, the Tatler, the Guardian, and the Rambler, and would discourse by hours together on the superiority of such publications to anything which has since been produced in our Edinburghs and Quarterlies. He was a great proficient in all questions of genealogy, and knew enough of almost every gentleman's family in England to say of what blood and lineage were descended all those who had any claim to be considered as possessors of any such luxuries. For blood and lineage he himself had a most profound respect. He counted back his own ancestors to some period long antecedent to the Conquest, and could tell you, if you would listen to him, how it had come to pass that they, like Cedric and Saxon, had been permitted to hold their own among the Norman barons. It was not, according to his showing, on account of any weak complacence on the part of his family towards their Norman neighbours. Some Ealfred of Ullathorne once fortified his own castle, and held out not only that, but the then existing cathedral of Barchester also, against one Geoffrey de Burgh in the time of King John, and Mr. Thorne possessed the whole history of the siege written on vellum, and illuminated in a most costly manner. It little signified that no one could read the writing, as, had that been possible, no one could have understood the language. Mr. Thorne could, however, give you all the particulars in good English, and had no objection to do so. It would be unjust to say that he looked down on men whose families were of recent date. He did not do so. He frequently consorted with such, and had chosen many of his friends from among them. But he looked on them as great millionaires are apt to look upon those who have small incomes, as men who have Sophocles at their fingers' ends regard those who know nothing of Greek. They might doubtless be a good sort of people, entitled to much praise for virtue, very admirable for talent, highly respectable in every way, but they were without the one great good gift. Such was Mr. Thorne's way of thinking on this matter. Nothing could atone for the loss of good blood. Nothing could neutralise its good effects. Few indeed were now possessed of it, but the possession was on that account the more precious. It was very pleasant to hear Mr. Thorne descant on this matter. Were you in ignorance to surmise that such a one was of a good family because the head of his family was a baronet of an old date, he would open his eyes with a delightful look of affected surprise, and modestly remind you that baronessities only dated from James I. He would gently sigh if you spoke of the blood of the Fitzgeralds and the De Boers, would hardly allow the claims of the Howards and the Lowthers, and has before now alluded to the Talbots as a family who had hardly yet achieved the full honours of a pedigree. In speaking once of a widespread race whose name had received the honours of 3 coronets, scions from which sat from various constituencies, some form of whose members had been in almost every cabinet formed during the present century, a brilliant race such as there are few in England, Mr. Thorne had called them all dirt. He had not intended any disrespect to these men. He admired them in many senses, and allowed them their privileges without envy. He had merely meant to express his feelings that the streams which ran through their veins were not yet purified by time to that perfection, had not become so genuine an ichor as to be worthy of being called blood in the genealogical sense. When Mr. Arabin was first introduced to him, Mr. Thorne had immediately suggested that he was one of the Arabins of Uphill Stanton. Mr. Arabin replied that he was a very distant relative of the family alluded to. To this Mr. Thorne surmised that the relationship could not be very distant. Mr. Arabin assured him that it was so distant that the families knew nothing of each other. Mr. Thorne laughed his gentle laugh at this, and told Mr. Arabin that there was now existing no branch of his family separated from the parent stock at an earlier date than the reign of Elizabeth, and that therefore Mr. Arabin could not call himself distant. Mr. Arabin himself was quite clearly an Arabin of Uphill Stanton. "But," said the vicar, "Uphill Stanton has been sold to the De Greys, and has been in their hands for the last 50 years. "And when it has been there 150, if it unluckily remains there so long," said Mr. Thorne, "your descendants will not be a whit the less entitled to describe themselves as being of the family of Uphill Stanton. Thank God no De Grey can buy that, and thank God no Arabin and no Thorne can sell it." In politics, Mr. Thorne was an unflinching conservative. He looked on those 53 Trojans, who, as Mr. Dodd tells us, censured free trade in November 1852, as the only patriots left among the public men of England. When that terrible crisis of free trade had arrived, when the repeal of the Corn Laws were carried by those very men whom Mr. Thorne had hitherto regarded as the only possible saviours of his country, he was for a time paralysed. His country was lost, but that was comparatively a small thing. Other countries had flourished and fallen, and the human race still went on improving under God's providence. But now all trust in human faith must for ever be at an end. Not only must ruin come, but it must come through the apostasy of those who had been regarded as the truest of true believers. Politics in England, as a pursuit for gentlemen, must be at an end. Had Mr. Thorne been trodden underfoot by a Whig, he could have borne it as a Tory and a martyr, but to be so utterly thrown over and deceived by those he had so earnestly supported, so thoroughly trusted, was more than he could endure and live. He therefore ceased to live as a politician, and refused to hold any converse with the world at large on the state of the country. Such were Mr. Thorne's impressions for the first 2 or 3 years after Sir Robert Peel's apostasy, but by degrees his temper, as did that of others, cooled down. He began once more to move about, to frequent the bench and the market, and to be seen at dinners, shoulder to shoulder with some of those who had so cruelly betrayed him. It was a necessity for him to live, and that plan of his for avoiding the world did not answer.
Excuse me, just yawning.
He, however, and others around him who still maintained the same staunch principles of protection, men like himself who were too true to flinch at the cry of a mob, had their own way of consoling themselves. They were, and felt themselves to be, the only true depositories left to certain Eleusinian mysteries, there we go, got there eventually, of certain deep and wondrous services of worship by which alone the gods could be rightly approached. To them, and them only, was it now given to know those things, and to perpetuate them, if that might still be done, by the careful and secret education of their children. We have read how private and peculiar forms of worship have been carried on from age to age in families, which to the outer world have apparently adhered to the services of some ordinary church. And so by degrees it was with Mr. Thorne. He learned at length to listen calmly while protection was talked of as a thing dead, although he knew within himself that it was still quick with a mystic life. Nor was he without a certain pleasure that such knowledge, though given to him, should be debarred from the multitude. He became accustomed to hear, even among country gentlemen, that free trade was after all not so bad, and to hear this without dispute, although conscious within himself that everything good in England had gone with his old palladium. He had within himself something of the feeling of Cato, who gloried that he could kill himself because Romans were no longer worthy of their name. Mr. Thorne had no thought of killing himself, being a Christian, and still possessing his £4,000 a year, but the feeling was not on that account the less comfortable. Mr. Thorne was a sportsman, and had been active though not outrageous in his sports. Previous to the great downfall of politics in his country, he had supported the hunt by every means in his power. He had preserved game till no goose or turkey could show a tail in the parish of St. Ewolds. He had planted gorse covers with more care than oaks and larches. He had been more anxious for the comfort of his foxes than of his ewes and lambs. No meat had been more popular than Ullathorne, no man's stables had been more liberally open to the horses of distant men than Mr. Thorne's, no man had said more, written more, or done more to keep the club up. The theory of protection could expand itself so thoroughly in the practices of a county hunt. But when the great ruin came, when the noble master of the Barsetshire hounds supported the recreant minister in the House of Lords, and basely surrendered his truth, his manhood, his friends, and his honour for the hope of a garter, then Mr. Thorne gave up the hunt. He did not cut his covers, for that would not have been the act of a gentleman. He did not kill his foxes, for that, according to his light, would have been murder. He did not say that his covers should not be drawn, or his earths stopped, for that would have been illegal according to the by-laws prevailing among country gentlemen. But he absented himself from home on the occasion of every meet at Ullathorne, left the covers to their fate, and could not be persuaded to take his pink coat out of the press, or his hunters out of his stable. This lasted for 2 years, and then by degrees he came round. He first appeared at a neighbouring meet on a pony, dressed in his shooting coat, as though he had trotted in by accident. Then he walked up one morning on foot to see his favourite gorse drawn, and when his groom brought his mare out by chance, he did not refuse to mount her. He was next persuaded by one of the immortal 53 to bring his hunting materials over to the other side of the county and take a fortnight with the hounds there, and so gradually he returned to his old life. But in hunting, as in other things, he was only supported by an inward feeling of mystic superiority to those with whom he shared the common breath of outer life. Mr. Thorne did not live in solitude at Ullathorne. He had a sister who was 10 years older than himself, and who participated in his prejudices and feelings so strongly that she was a living caricature of all his foibles. She would not open a modern quarterly, did not choose to see a magazine in her drawing-room, and would not have polluted her fingers with a shred of the Times for any consideration. She spoke of Addison, Swift and Steele as though they were still living, regarded Defoe as the best-known novelist of his country, and thought of Fielding as a young but meritorious novice in the fields of romance. In poetry, she was familiar with names as late as Dryden, and once had been seduced into reading The Rape of the Lock, but she regarded Spenser as the purest type of her country's literature in this line. Genealogy was her favourite insanity. Those things which are the pride of most genealogists were to her contemptible. Arms and mottos set her beside herself. Yelfrid of Ullathorne had wanted no motto to assist him in cleaving to the brisket Geoffrey de Burgh, and Yelfrid's great-grandfather, the gigantic Ullafrid, had required no other arms than those which nature gave him to hurl from the top of his own castle a cousin of the base invading Norman. To her all modern English names were equally insignificant. Hengist, Horsa, and such like had for her ears the only true savour of nobility. She was not contented unless she could go beyond the Saxons, and would certainly have christened her children, had she had any children, by the names of the ancient Britons. In some respects she was not unlike Scott's Ulrica, and had she been given to cursing, she would certainly have done so in the names of Mr., Skogula, and Zernebock. Not having submitted to the embraces of any polluting Norman, as poor Ulrica had done, and having assisted no parricide, the milk of human kindness was not curdled in her bosom. She never cursed, therefore, but blessed rather. This, however, she did in a strange uncouth Saxon manner that would have been unintelligible to any peasants but her own. As a politician, Miss Thorne had been so thoroughly disgusted with public life by base deeds long antecedent to the Corn Law question, that had but little moved her. In her estimation, her brother had been a fast young man, hurried away by a too ardent temperament into democratic tendencies. Now, happily, he was brought to sounder views by seeing the iniquity of the world. She had not yet reconciled herself to the Reform Bill, and still groaned in spirit over the defalcations of the Duke as touching the Catholic emancipation. If asked whom she thought the Queen should take as her counsellor, she would probably have named Lord Eldon, and when reminded that the venerable man was no longer present in the flesh to assist us, she would probably have answered with a sigh that none now could help us but the dead. In religion, Miss Thorne was a pure Druidess. We would not have it understood by that she did actually in those latter days assist at any human sacrifices, or that she was in fact hostile to the Church of Christ. She had adopted the Christian religion as a milder form of the worship of her ancestors, and had always appealed to her doing so as evidence that she had no prejudices against reform when it could be shown that reform was salutary. This reform was the most modern of any to which she had as yet acceded, it being presumed that British ladies had given up their paint and taken to some sort of petticoats before the days of St. Augustine. That further feminine step in advance which combines paint and petticoats together had not found a votary in Miss Thorne. But she was a druidess in this, that she regretted she knew not what in the usages and practices of her church. She sometimes talked and constantly thought of good things gone by, though she had but the faintest idea of what those good things had been. She imagined that a purity had existed which was now gone, that a piety had adorned our pastors, and a simple docility our people, for which it may be feared history gave her but little true warrant. She was accustomed to speak of Cranmer as though he had been the firmest and most simple-minded of martyrs, and of Elizabeth as though the pure Protestant faith of her people had been the one anxiety of her life. It would have been cruel to undeceive her, had it been possible, but it would have been impossible to make her believe that the one was a time-serving priest, willing to go any length to keep his place, and that the other was, in fact, in heart a papist, with this sole proviso, that she should be her own pope. And so Miss Thorne went on sighing and regretting, looking back to the divine right of kings as the ruling axiom of a golden age, and cherishing, low down in the bottom of her heart of hearts, a dear unmentioned wish for the restoration of some exiled Stuart. Who would deny her the luxury of her sighs, or the sweetness of her soft regrets? In her person and her dress she was perfect, and well she knew her own perfection. She was a small, elegantly made old woman, with a face from which the glow of her youth had not departed without leaving some streaks of a roseate hue. She was proud of her colour, proud of her grey hair, which she wore in short, crisp curls peering out all around her face from the dainty white lace cap. To think of all the money that she spent in lace used to break the heart of poor Mrs. Quiverful with her 7 daughters. She was proud of her teeth, which were still white and numerous, proud of her bright, cheery eye, proud of her short, jaunty step, and very proud of the neat, precise, small feet with which those steps were taken. She was proud also, aye, very proud, of the rich brocaded silk in which it was her custom to ruffle through her drawing-room. We know what was the custom of the Lady of Branksome. 29 knights of fame hung their shields in Branksome Hall. The Lady of Ullathorne was not so martial in her habits, but hardly less costly. She might have boasted that 29 silken skirts might have been produced in her chamber, each fit to stand alone. The 29 shields of the Scottish heroes were less independent, and hardly more potent to withstand any attack that may be made on them. Miss Thorne, when fully dressed, might be said to have been armed cap à pie, and she was always fully dressed, as far as was ever known to mortal man. For all this rich attire, Miss Thorne was not indebted to the generosity of her brother. She had a very comfortable independence of her own, which she divided among juvenile relatives, the milliners and the poor, giving much the largest share to the latter. It may be imagined, therefore, that with all her little follies she was not unpopular. All her follies have, we believe, been told. Her virtues were too numerous to describe, and not sufficiently interesting to deserve description. While we are on the subject of the Thornes, one word must be said of the house they lived in. It was not a large house, nor a fine house, nor perhaps to modern ideas a very commodious house, but by those who loved the peculiar colour and peculiar ornaments of genuine Tudor architecture, it was considered a perfect gem. We beg to own ourselves among the number, and therefore take this opportunity to express our surprise that so little is known by English men and women of the beauties of English architecture. The ruins of the Colosseum, the Campanile of Florence, St. Mark's, Cologne, the Bourse and Notre Dame are with our tourists as familiar as household words, but they know nothing of the glories of Wiltshire, Dorsetshire, and Somersetshire. Nay, we much question whether many noted travellers, men who have pitched their tents perhaps under Mount Sinai, are not ignorant that there are glories in Wiltshire, Dorsetshire, and Somersetshire. We beg that they will go and see. Apologies, punch the mic there. Mr. Thorne's house was called Ullathorne Court, and was properly so called, for the house itself formed two sides of a quadrangle, which was completed on the other two sides by a wall about 20 feet high. This wall was built of cut stone, rudely cut indeed, and now much worn, but of a beautiful rich tawny yellow colour, the effect of that stone crop of minute growth which it had taken 3 centuries to produce. The top of this wall was ornamented by huge round stone balls of the same colour as the wall itself. Entrance into the court was had through a pair of iron gates, so massive that no one could comfortably open or close them, consequently they were rarely disturbed. From the gateway 2 paths led obliquely across the court, that to the left reaching the hall door, which was in the corner made by the angle of the house, and that to the right leading to the back entrance, which was at the farther end of the longer portion of the building. With those who are now adepts in contriving house accommodation, it will militate much against Ullathorne Court that no carriage could be brought into the hall door. If you enter Ullathorne at all, you must do so, fair reader, on foot, or at least in a bath chair. No vehicle drawn by horses ever comes within that iron gate. But this is nothing to the next horror that will encounter you. On entering the front door, which you do by no very grand portal, you find yourself immediately in the dining room. "What? No hall?" exclaims my luxurious friend, accustomed to all the comfortable appurtenances of modern life. Appurtenance, whatever. "Yes, kind sir, a noble hall, if you will but observe it. A true old English hall of excellent dimensions for a country gentleman's family, but if you please, no dining parlour." Both Mr. and Miss Thorne were proud of this peculiarity of their dwelling, though the brother was once all but tempted by his friends to alter it. They delighted in the knowledge that they, like Cedric, positively dined in their true hall, even though they so dined tête-à-tête. But though they had never owned, they had felt and endeavoured to remedy the discomfort of such an arrangement. A huge screen partitioned off the front door and a portion of the hall, and from the angle so screened off a second door led into a passage which ran along the larger side of the house next to the courtyard. Either my reader or I must be a bad hand at topography if it be not clear that the great hall forms the ground floor of the smaller portion of the mansion, that which was to your left as you entered the iron gate, and that it occupies the whole of this wing of the building. It must be equally clear that it looks out on a trim mown lawn through 3 quadrangular windows, with stone mullions, each window divided into a larger portion at the bottom and a smaller portion at the top, and each portion again divided into 5 by perpendicular stone supporters. There may be windows which give a better light than such as these, and it may be, as my utilitarian friend observes, that the giving of light is the desired object of a window. I will not argue the point with him. Indeed I cannot. But I shall not the less die in the assured conviction that no sort or description of a window is capable of imparting half so much happiness to mankind as that which had been adopted at Ullathorne Court. "What? Not an oriel?" says Miss Diana de Middleage. "No, Miss Diana, not even an oriel, beautiful as is an oriel window. It has not about it so perfect a feeling of quiet English homely comfort. Let oriel windows grace a college, or the half-public mansion of a potent peer, but for the sitting-room of a quiet country of quiet country ladies, of ordinary homely folk, nothing can equal the square mullioned windows of the Tudor architects. The hall was hung round with family female insipidities by Lely, and unprepossessing male thorns in red coats by Kneller, each thorn having been let into a panel in the wainscoting in the proper manner. At the farther end of the room was a huge fireplace, which afforded much ground of difference between the brother and sister. An antiquated grate that would hold about 100 weight of coal had been stuck on to the hearth by Mr. Thorne's father. This hearth had of course been intended for the consumption of wood faggots, and the iron dogs for the purpose were still standing, though half buried in the masonry of the grate. Miss Thorne was very anxious to revert to the dogs. The dear good old creature was always glad to revert to anything, and had she been systematically indulged, would doubtless in time have reflected that fingers were made before forks, and have reverted accordingly. But in the affairs of the fireplace, Mr. Thorne would not revert. Country gentlemen around him all had comfortable grates in their dining rooms. He was not exactly the man to have suggested a modern usage, but he was not so far prejudiced as to banish those which his father had prepared for his use. Mr. Thorne had, indeed, once suggested that, with very little contrivance, the front door might have been so altered as to open at least into the passage. But on hearing this, his sister Monica, such was Miss Thorne's name, had been taken ill, and had remained so for a week. Before she came downstairs, she received a pledge from her brother that the entrance should never be changed in her lifetime. At the end of the hall opposite to the fireplace, a door led into the drawing-room, which was of equal size and lighted with precisely similar windows. But yet the aspect of the room was very different. It was papered, and the ceiling, which in the hall showed the old rafters, was whitened and finished with a modern cornice. Miss Thorne's drawing-room, or as she always called it withdrawing-room, was a beautiful apartment. The windows opened on to the full extent of the lovely trim garden. Immediately before the window were plots of flowers in stiff, stately, stubborn little beds, each bed surrounded by a stone coping of its own. Beyond there was a low parapet wall, on which stood urns and images, fauns, nymphs, satyrs, and a whole tribe of Pan's followers. And then again, beyond that, a beautiful lawn sloped away to a sunk fence which divided the garden from the park. Mr. Thorne's study was at the end of the drawing-room, and beyond that were the kitchen and the offices. Doors opened into both Miss Thorne's withdrawing-room and Mr. Thorne's sanctum from the passage above alluded to, which, as it came to the latter room, widened itself so as to make space for the huge black oak stairs which led to the upper regions. Such was the interior of Ullathorne Court. But having thus described it, perhaps somewhat too tediously, we beg to say that it is not the interior to which we wish to call the English tourist's attention, though we advise him to lose no legitimate opportunity of becoming acquainted with it in a friendly manner. It is the outside of Ullathorne that is so lovely. Let the tourist get admission at least into the garden, and fling himself on that soft sward just opposite to the exterior angle of the house. He will there get the double frontage, and enjoy that which is so lovely, the expanse of architectural beauty without the formal dullness of one long line. It is the colour of Ullathorne that is so remarkable. It is all of that delicious tawny hue which no stone can give unless it has on it the vegetable richness of centuries. Strike the wall with your hand, and you will think that the stone has on it no covering, but rub it carefully, and you will find that the colour comes off upon your finger. No colourist that has ever yet worked from a palette has been able to come up to this rich colouring of years, crowding themselves on years. Ullathorne is a high building for a country house, for it possesses 3 stories, and in each story the windows are of the same sort as that described, though varying in size, and varying also in their lines athwart the house. Those of the ground floor are all uniform in size and position, but those above are irregular both in size and place, and this irregularity gives a bizarre and not unpicturesque appearance to the building. Along the top, on every side, runs a low parapet, which nearly hides the roof, and at the corners are more figures of fauns and satyrs. Such is Ullathorne House. But we must say one word of the approach to it, which shall include all the description which we mean to give of the church also. The picturesque old church of St. Ewald's stands immediately opposite to the iron gates which open into the court, and is all but surrounded by the branches of the lime trees which form the avenue leading up to the house from both sides. This avenue is magnificent, but it would lose much of its value in the eyes of many proprietors by the fact that the road through it is not private property. It is a public lane between hedgerows, with a broad grass margin on each side of the road, from which the lime trees spring. Ullathorne Court, therefore, does not stand absolutely surrounded by its own grounds, though Mr. Thorne is owner of all the adjacent land. This, however, is the source of very little annoyance to him. Men, when they are acquiring property, think much of such things, but they who live where their ancestors have lived for years do not feel the misfortune. It never occurred either to Mr. or Miss Thorne that they were not sufficiently private, because the world at large might, if it so wished, walk or drive by their iron gates. That part of the world which availed itself of the privilege was, however, very small. Such a year or two since were the Thornes of Ullathorne. Such, we believe, are the inhabitants of many an English country home. May it be long before their number diminishes. And that is where we shall finish for tonight. Thank you for listening. And thank you for listening to, frankly, what is like an estate agent's account of an English country house, which I quite enjoyed. But yes, I hope you enjoyed. I am certainly enjoying Barchester Towers. I like Mr. Arabin. He seems like a decent chap, apart from, what has been said about his views on women. Let's see if there's anybody to raid over to. Shall we? Is Stephen around? Let's have a look. He is... Oh. Okay, well, Sam and I will not be watching this, because spoilers. But we will throw you over to our good friend Stephen, who we haven't raided over to for a little while. Who is blueprinting. Whoop, whoop, whoop. So, yeah, go enjoy some puzzles. In theory, we should be back on Saturday with some short stories from Sam. We will keep you updated if that is not the case. But yes, thank you all very much for being here. You're all lovely people. Go take care of yourselves and everyone around you. And we shall see you again, hopefully, soon. Thank you very much, and good night.